Welcome to the United States of America podcast. I'm your host, Gregory Clarkson, and we are changing it up a bit today. We're broadcasting live from AA Farms on Kansas. If you've missed past episodes, please make sure to take the time to watch the first episode and watch the rest like a documentary. We are a people at peace, and we have declared peace to all nations around the world. This is not a marketing and promotional channel. We are shining a light on knowledge that is being hidden from you. We are sharing the truth about your birthright and your inheritance. We have moderators who are assisting in the comments section. Be kind and self-govern. If you have questions, please put them in all caps and enter them only once per show. Now I'm proud to introduce to you Justice Anna Maria, who is joining us live from Alaska today. Hello.
Hi, Greg.
I'm back.
Yes, you are. We missed you. We missed you.
We've had a lot going on, so glad to be back, though.
Well, can you give us an update on progress with your wonderful project that you've been working so hard on?
Which one is that?
Which one? Yeah, I understand.
Kind of like you, right? Which one?
Yeah, right. The automated land patent and recording system that you've been working on.
Yeah, it's still in progress, but it's getting closer. We've been doing a lot of testing with it and trying to get some real time runs on it. So we're really close with that, and along with that, I'm still trying to learn the whole process to get the land patent, the grant and all of that, so that I can go ahead and record my land.
Sure, right, and that process in itself is such a learning process, and in doing it yourself, then you gain insight into what's needed systemically. And I know you're a systems guy, and you're picking up on, oh well, there's the database for this, and there's the database for that, and we need to tie. We need to have a link so people can go search here, and as you go through this, you'll figure out what's really needed, and
Right.
start making those connections for people, and that will make the whole process not only easier for them to record their patent interest and their other property claims, but it will also kind of streamline the process for many people, because otherwise we're just we're repeating the wheel, we're recreating the wheel every time that somebody does a chain of title, every time somebody
Right.
does a grant search, every time somebody does a patent search, a land patent search. They're starting out from scratch, and they don't necessarily have the best tools or the best knowledge for this. Now, we do have a couple of experts, and we do have some information I want to share with you, because they went through and developed information about all of this. And I want to make sure I get that to you on thumb drive so that you have a chance to kind of sort through that and take in the value of their experience as you're kind of fine tuning and getting ready to launch this new recording venue. And I did want to take some time out and explain that this recording venue that Gregg has been working on so hard is it's started out because farmers need a way to record their land patents. And the land patenting process, as it's developed, has had a lot of different tweaks and turns on the way. And it hasn't always been easy to do, because you have to publish your interest in the patent for a period of 60 days. And you have to be able to prove that you published it for 60 days. And where do you go to do that, right?
Right.
We've had a lot of people having to publish it on bulletin boards and then go there every day and snap a photo and time date the photo to have a record that they actually published it for 60 days. And it's an unreasonable burden, really, that people have had to do this. So now, by creating this new system that allows you to basically publish your land patent interest at a public source, um, it's going to make it easier for people to um, fulfill that part of the land patent claim process. And I'm very grateful to Gregg and the people who are working with him on this little, it's not a little project, it's a big project, to create such a resource for the people of America and potentially people all over the world
Right.
who need the same kind of service. And
Well,
those
and it's,
services,
yeah,
those
it's
services
so,
are
it's so
passion.
important. Yeah, it's so important with this land. I mean, there's many, many reasons why, but we have a generational situation here where a lot of the farmers are aged, we'll say, well aged, but be a lot of turnover in land. Just and that's difficult because for a number of reasons, the younger generation may not want to take over the family farm. And some of those reasons may be because it's so restrictive. It's money or currency. You got to answer to the banks. You got to answer to the USDA. You can only plant certain things if you want to get money from the bank. It's this whole control structure. Well, let's throw all that out. Let's get rid of all that. And to me, it starts with the people, but then the land, and making the claim to the land. Now you can say to the system, get out of my way. I don't need you. Get out of my way. I'm going to do what I want on my own land. And one of the things we've talked about here on Kansas on our assembly is hemp, growing hemp.
Sure.
It's thousands and thousands of uses. But one really interesting thing about hemp is it also detoxes the soil. It's
Right.
one of the best plants to detox the soil. How we get these chemicals, that have been dumped on for years. Well, if I want to plant hemp in the system, I have to get a license. We've talked a lot, we've all been talking a lot about that word, right? I don't know
Right.
what's immoral about planting hemp, but evidently I need a license for it. Well,
No,
that's
well,
that's just ridiculous. There's no reason.
all we really need to do is join together and bring a front-on challenge to the federal government to force them to show their regulatory authority over anything but alcohol, tobacco, and firearms.
Right.
They don't have any regulatory authority over anything but those three things, and yet they have claimed regulatory authority with respect to their own employees and dependents, and then they've mischaracterized us as their employees and dependents. And
Right.
that's how they've hooked everything up and have created this ridiculous series of claims against our rights and prerogatives. But really, they don't have that regulatory authority. And any farmer who wants to grow hemp, field hemp, has a tiny amount of THC, which is the compound that causes the drug effects
Mhm.
of marijuana. So any farmer who wants to grow just plain old hemp should be allowed to do so without as much as a backward glance from any bureaucrat or official.
That's
Uh,
right.
so I think that we, as a group, as we go forward, and we are settling more of these issues between ourselves and our federal subcontractors, that should be one that's brought up in the realm of agriculture,
Yes.
for sure.
Yes.
Because as you will notice in one of the, I'm sorry Niti isn't with us today. I'm sure she would have some ideas and thoughts about the great role that India is now beginning to play. Um, of course, she was born in this country, and her husband was born here, and they're American, but they have family members and ties and interests in India too, and it's very interesting how hemp is a crop that is very traditional in India.
Mhm.
And, by opening up the American farm capacity to grow hemp, I think that it won't be a competition. It will be a more of a specialization because we have a slightly different climate, really. They're much more equatorial, warmer climate
Hmm.
overall. And so their hemp capacity is slightly different and more tilted toward other varieties of the hemp plant than we would be. So you've got a wider spectrum of products and a wider spectrum of characteristics among these crops. I think it would
Yeah.
be fascinating and very valuable for collaboration to
Yeah, the
happen.
maturation times are quite a bit different, among the different species of the hemp plant. We've grown a plant called sun hemp here, and the reason why we've done that is in a diverse cover crop mix to get soil benefits. The interesting thing about sun hemp in Kansas is our growing season is significantly shorter than where it comes from, Africa. And I think it's 285 days to seed on sun hemp. Well, we don't have a 285-day growing season. That first October cold snap, it
Yeah,
just killed it.
yeah,
So,
right.
but you're right. So we need to get those shorter maturation plants that will add that diversity that may not even grow in India because of their climate, too hot,
Right.
basically. So yeah, I think there's a great synergistic opportunity here.
Yeah, and all of the research that goes into hemp is fascinating. I
Hmm.
have a friend that we call her the weedologist. That girl knows more about hemp of all kinds than you could ever imagine. It's
I
just
bet.
amazing. And she can fine tune exactly what you need, you know.
I want to meet her. I want to meet her.
Oh, she's wonderful. I think she went to university for it. But
Yeah,
anyway, she's a great resource for anyone who wants to know the different varieties of hemp, the uses of these varieties, and you know their growing conditions and everything about hemp. So
hmm,
we have some people like that who are extremely knowledgeable,
hmm,
and I think that that is, the future of farming is to make use of our our knowledge, our ability
right,
to look at agricultural products across a wide spectrum and in different climates, you
right.
know. But that's just the tip of our iceberg.
Yeah, that's true.
We've, we've got so much to do, and uh, this past week has been very gratifying for me because we finally got the attention of the Trump administration focused on chemtrails and the damage that these uh, private spraying programs are having on the land and soil of this country and the water too.
Yep,
Primarily, they're aimed at land because uh, the the elements that they're spraying are incendiaries.
yep,
But now they've been caught dumping other things too. They've been dumping nanobot type uh, pollutants and things of that nature. And as Greg just brought forward, hemp is one of those plants that has the ability to capture these pollutants and recondition the soil.
yep,
So you might not be able to use the hemp product from that field that was being treated that year
right.
because they're taking up the heavy metals, they're taking up the strontium and the barium. You might have to, find a way to process the hemp to
Yeah,
clean it up further, but after that you can plant and not have the pollution.
I think that'd be interesting to get a bunch of the experts together because, like you said, you may have to just sacrifice that first crop. But some of the things we want to do is get the stuff out of the soil, but we also want to, hemp is a mass generator if you think of it like that. The
Right.
the mass that it creates We want as much of that mass to fall back onto the soil, and that's carbon. That's organic matter, which our soils are so depleted of organic matter as well. So if we could get the experts together, I don't know what the plant would do to the various heavy metals. Does it make it? It seems like it would have to capture it, and then you would have to dispose or process it somehow. But if
Right.
we could figure that out, and does it put it in the leaf? Does it put it in the stem? And if we could understand that, we could maximize the amount of the product that stays on the field to become organic matter, and then maybe a year or two of that, and then you go into industrial hemp production, and we start really getting some use out of it.
Well, and if we figure out where the plant stores it. Now, echinacea has a ability to process pollutants. Um, but the part of it that matters to us is often the flower. Okay.
Yes.
So there'll be a lot of things that we can use, alfalfa and legume crops add back into the soil. Um,
Yes.
and, and that kind of rotation of crops and adding back into the soil during fallow years, that is so necessary to maintain the nutrient value of food crops.
Yeah, and we've done a lot of work with legumes, like you said, cross mixed with your grasses, cross mixed with brassicas, things like that. And like with the hemp, for example, it's got a very tall canopy. Okay,
Mhm.
can we get a short canopy species in there that grows before it? That's so a hemp would be a nitrogen fixer. It'd be a very strong nitrogen fixer. So you'd nodulate the nitrogen on the roots. Maybe we can get something else in there to grow along synergistically with it. Once the hemp gets up and creates its canopy, that other will probably not do very well. But in the roots under into the soil, they're going to be working at the enzymatic level. They're going to be exchanging enzymes and effectively creating a microbiome. So, like you said, there's so much that we can do, so much that we can learn from this, and it all starts with breaking the farmers away from the system that they're stuck in. That's the key.
Yes, and that is true all the way across the board in all sectors of the economy. We've all been stifled by monopolistic interests, and those monopolistic interests have dumbed us down. They've limited our creativity. They have tried to regulate our freedom to grow what we want to grow and to take care of our land properly. It's been a mess, but
Yeah.
we are now getting organized and getting the farmers up to speed on, number one, how to protect themselves and protect
Yeah.
their interests, and number two, how to join together in a political and legal framework that we can begin to see joint actions across multiple states and regions to secure the future for our food supplies and our water, which are absolutely fundamental, that
Yep.
none of us can afford to turn our back on or be unconcerned about.
No, not at all. And you
No.
you think about we talk about health, which they do not have a delegation to regulate. So health starts in the soil. That so we can grow healthy food and animals can graze on healthy grasses and all of that. But there's just so much more to it than that. One of the things we've been talking about in the Kansas Assembly is, well, what are some of the projects we want to do when the GFG bank gets when the Assembly's bank account gets funded? What do we want to do? And this is one of them we talked about. We want to facilitate. We want to facilitate these farmers because we're in the international realm, so we can work with the neighboring states, just like you were saying, and we can facilitate them getting back to restoring the soil, producing healthy products, creating a whole new economy again.
Right.
One of the things that just came out is the farmers are just being offered another round of handouts. I don't know if you're aware of this, but it's another round of handouts due to the impact of the tariffs. But the little stipulation on there is it's for authorized commodities or approved commodities. It's the only way they get their handout.
Commodity
Well,
rigging. That's called commodity rigging, and it's illegal. And the government, the corporation, has been getting away with this for years.
yes,
They've been claiming it's for the public good, but it's actually for their own corporate benefit because they have used it to suppress competitors and competing products, and they have
yes,
used it to limit supplies of commodities in the markets. It's
yep,
been commodity rigged for generations, and they try to justify this fine-tuned manipulation of the markets and the commodity supplies uh, with the idea that they have some sort of overarching knowledge or plan that's for the good of all. And they really don't. They don't at
no,
all. So if we did have that kind of a system where there was a need to restrict the growth of a commodity, then it would be simple enough to assist farmers into branching out into developing other resources and other products.
yeah,
But instead, they pay them not to produce,
yeah,
or
exactly.
they pay them to produce only this much, and then leave the market flat for other things. So it's really been a commodity rigging scheme
It
that the
has.
USDA and Small Business Administration and the Department of Agriculture have imposed on American farmers for generations. And the result has been we have had almost dust bowl like conditions in many states in the Midwest where the soil has been degraded by inorganic farming practices, where
Yep.
fields have been dumped on with inorganic fertilizers or fertilizers that are, let's put it bluntly, are formed from ammonium and petroleum distillates.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
so we've basically polluted our fields, and then we've additionally polluted them with pesticides and herbicides.
that all
And
runs off. By the way, those fields don't hold any water. So when a rain comes along, it cannot hold the water because I don't call it soil in those fields. I call it dirt. That's the difference between dirt and soil. Dirt's dead, soil is alive. And soil will act like a sponge.
right,
We do tests. I think I've mentioned that before, where we dump so much water in a circular area. We use a coffee can ring with the whole bottom cut out, so tall, and you dump so much water in there, and you see how much water can that soil take. And there's fields that have been, the tillage fields and the synthetic fertilizers, as you're mentioning, they can't take they maybe a quarter inch an hour. Anything over that is going to go directly to the drainage ditch, which takes all the pesticides, herbicides, everything with it, and the topsoil, that's the little bit of dirt that's there, and it
right.
washes it down ultimately into the ocean, eventually into the Gulf.
And what happens then is that we get blooms of kelp and vast forests of seagrass and other unnatural growth in the
Yeah.
sea.
So we mess up that ecosystem while we're at
Yeah,
it.
yes, we manage to mess up both, and
Yeah.
and essentially we pollute the sea at the same time we're polluting the land, and then you have chemtrails added to all of that,
Yep.
uh, which are spraying incendiary chemicals on us that have no purpose.
Yeah.
I mean, strontium and barium and aluminum hydroxide and graphene and these things do nothing but pollute the land and soil
That's
and
right.
water.
Yeah.
So,
You talked about them knowing better. So the cover cropping, it's been around for many, many years. The Indians, it's been around for generations, but there's been a resurgence the last 10 to 15 years. So the government agencies have promoted some cover cropping as if they knew what they were doing. And what's interesting is they'll tell you, okay, we'll give you such and such money to reimburse for this seed, but you have to plant within these dates. And the dates that they give you, as an example, nitro radishes is something we can do. They'll grow very long, and they'll punch through the plow pan that's there, and
Mm-hmm.
and that's a big nitrogen fixer. But they have you plant those when they won't grow. Their dates are entirely wrong, and it's just ridiculous because they're spending our money
Right.
to pay the farmer to plant this thing that I don't know if they know it won't grow. I'm sure most of them don't know that. They're just ignorant, but some of them do. But the reality is it never grows, so it doesn't do anything. So the farmer wasted diesel, time, and our money to accomplish nothing. They don't know better, believe me.
Well, and the hard part is they don't listen when the farmers
Right,
tell them.
right,
When the farmers come forward and say, hey, well, this is a great idea, but we can't plant now because it'll be immediately killed by the frost in this area.
right.
And then they, in their megalithic, lumbering federal government, elephantine, slow, inept, ineffective process, it comes up through this subcommittee and that subcommittee, and maybe 10 years later, the simple fact that it won't work in this entire region, yeah, it'll work in these 3 states, but it won't work in these 5 states. Finally, it makes its way up to the top of the dung heap, and the administrators go, oh, we didn't know that.
Yep. And in the meantime, what's happened is it's just a continual process, but they lose the farmer. The farmer says, yeah, the last time I tried one of your wonderful ideas, it backfired on me. So why would I do it again? Fool me once, the old saying there, right? Fool me twice.
And forgive me for saying so, but most farmers operate on such a slim edge
Oh,
that,
yes.
can be affected by climate and, rainfall and so many different factors that they don't control.
That's right.
That they can't afford to take those kinds of risks
Not at all.
without some kind of backup or insurance or guarantee that they're not going to lose the value of all their labor and resources for an entire season.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of these farms would go out of business if they lost even one entire cycle.
Absolutely. Yes.
We can't afford to lose them, and we can't afford, a bunch of silly buggers type stuff that goes on.
Right. So
With the
the
government.
farmer is, in this area, in the Kansas area, is borrowing money in November, December to line up all their inputs, depending on what they're planting. If they're planting wheat, a winter crop, that's in the fall, they're borrowing money. They're putting the crop in the ground and fertilizing it and whatever else. And then in the case of wheat, it's harvested in July, but a lot of their other stuff is harvested, on out as late as November for like a soybean. So effectively, the system has that farmer in debt 11.9 months out of the year. It's they literally get their money for the year and turn right around and start buying up their inputs for the next season. So like you said, that cash flow is, I've ran businesses. Cash flow is king. There is no cash flow. They don't have cash flow. They can't manage cash flow. It just has to work. It's just as simple as that.
And that's why when we have something like, the Dutch elm disease or the spruce bug, borer and all these things, it's so devastating to those who are dependent on that particular natural resource.
Yes.
It's something that we've never been able to adequately address in any kind of farm policy. I think the most serious efforts were made during the Great Depression, when we had the Dust Bowls and all that other stuff going on. Government seemed to wake up for a few years and realized the importance of soil and soil conservation. And then the petroleum industry came in after the Second World War with all these whiz-bang new products. And they set up all of these cooperative extension programs. And they pushed all of these oil-based products on the farmers. So suddenly we had ammonia hydroxide plants. And we had these, anhydrous ammonia huge containers everywhere and trucks, transporting the stuff everywhere. And we had pesticides and we had herbicides and all these different things just proliferated like flowers in spring. And we, step by step, saw how, once again, the soil has returned to Dust Bowl conditions and is it's unable to accept water, which then causes damage through water runoff, uncontrolled water runoff, and drainage into reservoirs that then go down to the sea, and they pollute the rivers as they go, and they pollute the sea at the end. One of the things that's been a big international concern has been the death of the barrier reef. And they're finding out that a lot of the death of the coral reef is due to pollution that is being exacerbated by dam systems on the land. So, in order to, we have to face up to some big engineering and agricultural problems that involve the control of water, the purification of water, the use of water resources. But also, going hand in hand with that, we have the issue of the soil and its ability to retain water, its ability to retain moisture, period, at all, so that it doesn't get blown away in a windstorm, right? And how to create a healthy environment for plants. Now, there are many ancient things that are now coming forward, like terra preta. South America, they discovered that our prehistoric ancestors in South America discovered a means of using powdered wood charcoal, where biochar, and that reconditions the soil and allows it to hold nutrients. And this is something near and dear to my heart, because in Alaska we have essentially an Arctic desert. People don't think of it that way, but it is very dry, and it is the soil here is very porous. And so I, being an organic gal from day one, even back in Wisconsin, I mean, we were organic farmers back before it was stylish to be organic farmers. And, my mother looked at the effects of the inorganic fertilizers with her usual skepticism and decided against it, because she said, and this was 50 years ago, she said, well, we'll go right back to the Dust Bowl. And people will become reliant on this commercial product instead of on what is natural to the land, And she was exactly right. But anyway, we now have this problem here in Alaska where the soil is so friable. It's got a deep gravel base, which is great for water cleanliness and the filtration system of the earth. But it also means that when you plant a garden, you have to bring in a very poor local version of topsoil, and then you have to add amendments to it. All sorts of different things. Fortunately, we do have kelp and we do have fish meal in Alaska. But I quickly determined that you could add large amounts of soil conditioners designed to trap nutrients and water to this soil, but it would drain out in about 3 years. So, if you add, say, a large amount of kelp and chop it up real good and let it decay. That has a great impact on the soil, but the impact only lasts about 3 years.
Hmm.
Whereas if you add biochar to the soil, it's an indefinite improvement, and it traps lime and it traps, the nutrients from the other fertilizers. So biochar is a big deal up here.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah, what we go for is a simple description of we want our soil to look like cottage cheese. We want it to have structure. So you take a sharpshooter, if you know the term, I mean, a shovel, and you stick it in the ground and just flip that soil over, maybe about that deep. And you're looking for a couple things, but you're looking for charcoal, or cottage cheese. You're looking for kind of a structure to it. You're also wanting to get that smell, that carbon smell, and then most of all, I want to see earthworms.
Yeah.
If the earthworms are there, everything's just right with the world.
Yes, you should have heard me squeal with delight when I found my first earthworm in my garden after I added all those soil nutrients.
Yep.
My son was about 4 years old, and he came over and he looked at it. Why are you so excited about this, right? For any farmer, an earthworm is like, we got it right.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you got it. That worm is surviving. It's eating. It's pooping. Life is good in that soil. And what it means though is it has structure. It has the microbiome. The earthworm's telling you it has everything it needs. And if you can maintain that, I was thinking about that when you were describing. I don't know if you played around with cover crops up there too. So the biochar, and then trying to get various multi-species to fall back into there and really get that ramped up.
Yeah, we did. We've done everything from alfalfa to winter rye to.
Oh yeah, you have. Yeah. Okay.
So we've been doing that. We've known about that for all our lives, basically.
Yeah.
And but biochar was something new. That was something I learned about 10, 15 years ago. So it's not real new, but it had a wonderful effect on soils up here in Alaska where it's extremely porous.
Right.
And it would have a wonderful effect on land that was soggy, like reconditioning prior wetlands that had been converted. It would have a wonderful effect on desert because it would give it a skin again.
Yep, that's right.
It would have a wonderful effect on sandy soils like we have in the American Southwest, where you've got that very hard pan. I've forgotten the name of it off the top of my head, but caleche anyway, like in Mexico, there's this hard clay layer that is just almost like baked porcelain or baked, some kind of like flower pots, like terracotta.
Right, ceramic layer, yeah.
Yeah, and that's very hard to deal with on terms of gardening.
Right.
So things that we could do that if we were organized to do it on a national level would skyrocket the quality of our produce and our field crops, and ultimately also our animals. As Niti was commenting one day when we were talking about these things, I was talking about reconditioning an old orchard. And basically, the original farmers that homesteaded there, my great-grandparents, had an orchard on a side hill, a sunny southern side hill, typical, arrangement in the Midwest. And it was terraced because it was a steep side hill. And then they had ranges of fruit trees. They had the apples and they had the plums and they had a pear tree. And a garden with a bee, um, it'd be like a flower garden, right? With
Hmm.
beehives.
Yep. Yep.
And all of that is all structured into an orchard, right?
Yep.
And then they had like lanes in the orchard
Hmm.
where the cows and the horses
Hmm.
would use those areas, and they would be able to graze, yes, but the fundamental thing was that they were using this as like a trail or traffic route on in between these terraces, and then
Yeah.
they would be pooping and
Yeah.
snuffling around, and
Yeah.
and they would be fertilizing the apple orchard without really thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so yeah, so I'm looking at reconditioning that apple orchard and kind of redrawing the historical plan and replanting it because apple trees, you have about a 7-year period before they actually blossom and produce
Hmm.
fruit, and then you have another, say, 7 to 14 years where they're productive, and then they
Right.
start really petering out, just they become senescent, and then you still get a few apples but nothing like a real crop.
Right. Yeah.
So you have to keep turning over the orchardry, and
Yeah. You're right. Yeah. Exactly. Yep. Start a layer, and you just, like you said, work down those terraces, and then you just a continual process, basically. Yep.
it is. But what you get in return is a really healthy orchard that doesn't have fungus problems, doesn't have insect problems, uh, doesn't have the need
Yeah.
for all these pesticides and herbicides and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And you find that if you have healthy soil and you just take common measures to
Mhm.
maintain any uh, overgrowth of
Mhm.
insects or whatever, that you don't need all this stuff. It's just
And
extra.
the chickens do wonderful. If you could get chickens out there, they love the insects, so they really help out with. And then they scratch through the cow poop, and it sounds very romantic to say that. You graze the large animals through, and then the cows, and then the sheep, and then you follow with the chickens. It does sound sort of romantic in a way, I guess, if you're kind of a nerd like me, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to do that.
My grandmother did farming before there was chicken farming. She would have laughed. You know, she just put up chicken wire around this very large vegetable garden, and threw 50 chickens in there, and
Didn't have any bugs.
no bugs, plenty of fertilizer.
Yeah.
So yeah, and she had an entire field of nothing but asparagus, and she just chicken
Oh,
wired
wow.
and threw the chickens in there. And asparagus is a perennial crop in the Midwest.
Yep.
It comes up every year and grows like gangbusters.
And chickens
So
won't eat it. Chickens
and
don't like
will not eat it.
it.
So that was a perfect thing, and they were taking care of the chickweed and the grass and the bugs and everything else, and leaving with very little work to do
Right.
in that case. But there are all sorts of creative, great ways that farmers can grow healthier crops and create healthier soil and better water management and,
Yeah.
and everything else. But they have to be encouraged, and they
Yes.
have to be safeguarded, and they
Yes.
have to be educated. They have to be kind of brought along and shown,
Yep.
here's an example of what you can do with your farm. And when they come to these demonstration projects and things are explained to them and they see the difference and they go, oh, wow, you mean I can make an investment of this much and
Mhm.
I never have to do it again? And it's going to
Mhm.
have this kind of result? Their eyes get about as big as saucers, and they
Yep.
start thinking, you know, that $50,000 I've been putting out to, fertilize uh,
Right.
my fields here could be better spent doing this. And, and I would lose that $50,000 expense every year.
Well, and there's also there's your recurring expenses, but then through certain techniques you can reduce the amount of equipment you need, and smaller equipment too.
Yes.
And that's just tremendous. Instead of buying these combines or harvesters, they're $1 million and they depreciate 50% in the first year. That's $500,000. Well, let's get you out of that monocrop mentality where you have to grow, 5,000 acres of soybeans and get, or whatever, something crazy, and get you into more of a vertically integrated market of growing multiple different things, and you no longer need $1 million harvester.
Right. Well, and look at what's happened with those particular machines. Now, my brother-in-law worked for many years as a manager of an international harvester, I guess dealership is the right word.
Yep.
And so he'd become a manager from being a heavy equipment mechanic. That's what he was trained for in the military service. And then when he got out, he went to work for them, and he worked his way up the ranks to being a manager. But he got out of it. He retired and said he'd left at the right moment, because at that point they had begun action against John Deere and Case and several other big agricultural equipment producers, because they were basically monopolizing parts and repairs on the equipment that they were selling.
That's right.
And making it horrible for farmers, where farmers were basically being held
Yep.
by the neck. They've spent $1 million on this giant combine, say, and the dealership is saying, well, it's going to cost us $50,000 and take 10 weeks. But if you give us $100,000, we'll move it up and get it here in 2 weeks.
Right.
And if you've got to harvest in 2 weeks,
right.
you have no choice.
You have no choice.
And so they were playing this kind of game with the farmers and with the crops, with no conscience and nothing to stop them from doing these immoral things. And they were immoral. They were just nothing but the equivalent of racketeering.
Well, they did this primarily through technology.
Yeah.
So you would buy the combine or the harvester, the hardware, but
Right.
you didn't own the license to the software. They do.
Right.
And guess what? $1 million harvester does not run without software. So now you got $1 million piece of hardware that is worthless without their license to their software to allow you to run your hardware.
Right. And you're totally dependent on them for repair parts.
That's right.
There's no competition. If they're too busy, if their dealership is backed up with repairs ahead of you, then you could lose your whole crop.
Exactly.
And it's a terrible situation, but that's what things have become in this country. There's no longer a sense of product liability. There's no longer a sense of loyalty to the customer. There's no longer an understanding at the local level or at the regional level in these big multinational corporations of what's necessary to get the job done, right? And so they were pulling all of this, and they finally got sued for it. They finally, the regulatory agencies and some of the others finally woke up and said, hey, we can't have this. But, as Gregg points out, there's a big difference between a $50,000 Kubota that's a little, small machine that you can run around and, take care of a different kind of planting plan, right?
Mhm.
And $1 million case harvester,
Yep.
you know.
Yep.
And so,
Because all the stuff that it takes to go along with that $1 million harvester, the fuel truck and the header trailer, because these headers are, 50, 40, 50, 60 feet wide. Well, they don't
mm,
fit through gates, so they have to be put on a trailer and on and on and on and on and on. It's just entirely different. It's and I think that's where that vertically integrated thing would be. Your $50,000 Kubota. Let's say you have the orchard and you have a hay meadow and you have these this vertically integrated homestead is what we used to call it.
right,
That $50,000 Kubota is useful for all of those things, not just that one job that the $1 million machine. It's good for one thing, one thing only. He's still got to have a $750,000 tractor and and on and on and on. And that big tractor is really only good for one thing. They only run it probably to plant, and it's just
right.
crazy.
And the days when farmers work together as a community
Right.
have been fading away. So, what used to happen was that farmers looked at each other as brothers in arms. They were
Mhm.
all up against the same kinds of problems. So, you know, um, they would work together to make sure everybody's crops got harvested,
That's right.
you
That's right.
know, and that doesn't happen anymore.
And
Or
that's
at least it
another area, where maybe we can facilitate that as an assembly. Okay, we are going to raise crops that need a harvester, right?
doesn't.
Well, we don't want to, the assembly doesn't want to own a harvester, but can we coordinate that? Can we help be a liaison to
Mhm.
say, Joe over here is a harvester and Jim over here has the big 300 horsepower planting tractor.
Mhm.
Can we coordinate? Can we help facilitate this? I think there's a huge role to play there. And you were talking about the dealers. I remember when I was a kid, you had a John Deere dealer and a Case IH dealer in every little town, and they were independent. They were mom and pop dealers.
Right.
That does not exist anymore at all. All the mom and pops are gone. They gobbled them up, and these dealers are 15, 20 site locations now. Basically corporation on top of corporation on top of corporation.
They're transnational
And yeah, exactly.
and
That's
they're
right.
monopolies and
And
they need
yes,
to be busted.
yeah, they do. They do. Because it
Monopoly.
used to be you could go shop around, you go over to the local town over here to the east, and well, how much do you want for that tractor? And then you go to the little town to the west. Well, the guy over here is saying this much. And there was fun in that.
Right.
That's no longer there. You don't have that.
And there used to be a real hot market in used tractors and used
Yes.
farm equipment. And we had auction yards and we had granges where,
Yeah.
you could go at certain periods of the year and everybody who had a tractor that they were retiring for whatever reason would be selling off their tractors or their hay wagons or whatever. Uh,
Hmm.
where's that anymore?
Yeah. It's gone. It's gone.
Now they just depreciate it and throw it in the dump.
They do. They do. And they undervalue it when it comes time to the collateral for borrowing money. It's the whole game. We all know the game, but it's just magnified on the farmer because of the huge capital investment that's required and the length of time that they're carrying that note. It just, like I said, there's just no room for failure. There is what it comes down to. So I have a question for you, and it's a little off topic, but it does tie into farmers. I was doing a bunch of pulling the thread on automobiles, vehicles, driving, traveling, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I know that you had written a letter to the governor of Missouri. And I finally went back and found the article. I think it was August of last year. And it's Parsons is his last name. Did that letter go to the governor? And if so, did you get any good action out of it?
No, Governor Parsons in Missouri is one of those people that he should be called Silent Joe or something like that.
Okay.
There are certain governors that are really waking up and stepping up, by the
Right.
way. But we have to remember that they are basically franchise managers of the British territorial system.
Hmm.
And so they have to walk a line too, you know.
Yeah.
They are being somewhat controlled in what they can and cannot do by the political parties and by the actual higher ups in the corporate structure.
Hmm.
But we are encouraging more and more governors to get involved in actually promoting and protecting their state. And that's what they're supposed to be doing if they're acting for us, right? If
Right.
they're acting in a trust position for us, then they should be protecting the people and protecting the resources, both public and private.
Right.
And too often we find that they're kind of dead asleep at the wheel and more involved in payola and cronyism and that kind of either outright illegal action or quasi-immoral influence peddling and that sort of thing. Um, they're not really attuned to, they're politicians, they're not attuned to the practical world.
Right.
And, you know, I guess we could expect that given that they're operating in a foreign jurisdiction that has nothing to do with land and soil, right?
Right.
And we could expect that our people, conversely, operating on the jurisdiction of the land and soil, will be more interested in and devoted to land and soil resources, which of course includes surface water and aquifers.
Hmm.
So, you know, we're a different breed. We're coming at it from a different standpoint, and we're operating in a form of law that is more attuned to land property issues and soil issues, of course.
Right.
You know, and I can't say that there there have been efforts, at least in the past, to bring forward responsible programs to promote water and soil conservation.
Hmm.
But that's not really the same mindset of, you know, promoting the use, the responsible use of
Right.
land and soil assets. And so what we see is a real need to open up the entire gamut of responsible soil and water stewardship that embraces both farming and orchardry and forestry and all of these activities wherein mankind produces food for himself, produces food for the animals and birds, and produces food for um, the fungi,
Hmm.
all the other creatures and living organisms
Yep.
that is healthy and safe. And that's a whole different business than just conserving everything always. I mean,
Yeah.
it's important to conserve, but it's
Right.
also important to improve and to use and to
Right.
responsibly return and to be part of the whole dynamic cycle of life. And it
Yeah.
seems
Basically promote all fauna and flora on Earth.
right.
Yeah.
It's always interesting to me, Greg, that the book of Genesis very clearly gives us our
Mhm.
marching orders.
That's
You know,
right.
here's the gift,
Go
and your
use it.
role is to be the caretaker. You're
Yep.
supposed to be the caretaker. You're supposed to be here working with the earth, caring for the earth, taking care of the plants and animals. That's our
Yep.
role, according to Genesis.
Yep.
And so all the Muslims, all the Jews, and all the Christians have no excuse. Zero.
No.
Okay. We should have our attention focused on, you know, taking care of the land and the soil and the water and you know, this should be our primary focus above, beyond, and you know, first, last, and
Well,
all.
we were talking about the soil and we've talked about the plants and stuff like that, but I did a cover crop 6, 7 years ago, about a 12 species cover crop. And what I did was I planted it, I let it grow up, and then I planted in that fall behind it like a rye or something like a winter rye as a winter cereal because I want to keep a living root in the ground at all times.
Mhm.
Well, when I was planting into it, I had a bucket on the front of my tractor, and that bucket was knocking down the plants, and that was falling into the bucket. And I stopped for lunch, and I walked around the bucket, and the bucket looked like it was moving. And there was 1,000 different species of bugs in this bucket. I mean, good bugs, bad bugs, indifferent bugs, but bugs, right? And if you go through a monocrop field, you may get one type of bug, maybe, probably nothing because it's been sprayed and sprayed and sprayed. And it dawned on me, we talk about the bees, obviously very, very important to life, but just bugs in general. We all think bugs are pests, right? That's pesticides to get rid of the bugs. But those bugs they had their own little community going on out there in that field. And they were coexisting with one another and feeding off the plants and dying and falling into the ground. And the earthworms were probably eating their carcasses. And is this whole microcosm going on there? We just have lost sight of all of that. And it's a bit scary. But if there are no bugs and certainly no bees, there are no us. Not very long after that. There's no us.
And there's another one that we are, well, we've been ignorant of, the entire world of the fungi.
Yeah.
The vast myceliums that support life on this planet. We're just beginning to understand the realm and the role of fungus. And
Right.
there's this great documentary called Fabulous Fungi. And maybe it's kind of a dopey title, but it's a video, it's a documentary, and it takes you through all the things that have been happening in this country and that relate to mycology, the study of funguses, mushrooms, and the things that they're discovering in terms of useful products from mushrooms. And it's staggering. It's staggering. I mean, we normally just think of mushrooms, I think of, the little white button mushrooms you buy in the grocery store. And in recent years, we've been seeing more variety. We've been seeing cremini, which are the little brown button mushrooms. We've been seeing shiitake mushrooms. We've been seeing portobello mushrooms. We've been seeing some of the oriental mushrooms, the little tiny ones that, so we're becoming more sophisticated about mushrooms, right?
Yep.
Just as consumers and as cooks.
Right.
But that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
Fungi they're like little chemical factories. And they produce everything from poisons to just incredibly rich extracts of nutrients and minerals.
And oxygen.
And oxygen, yes. And, one of the most promising cancer-fighting agents that we have is the turkey tail mushroom, which kills the parasites that are the linchpin in forming cancer tumors. Right. And so, turkey tail mushroom is one of the ingredients of the famous Canadian Ojibwe Essiac tea. And just by itself, the turkey tail mushroom taken in capsules can turn the difference between remission and non-remission of cancer.
Wow.
So, and this is something that people are just beginning to learn and experience, but it's been known to the native population of this continent for thousands of years.
I've read about lion's mane mushroom, being very good for the neurological, like your Parkinson's and various aspects like that. It helps actually regenerate, the neurons in the brain and the nerves to have communication.
All right. I'm 69 years old. I drink Lion's Mane coffee every day.
There you go. Yeah.
And it does help. It does. Those moments when you're forgetting things,
Mm-hmm.
start taking advantage of the new knowledge that's out there. And if you haven't heard of this before, by all means, go online. Fabulous Fungi. You can watch it
I
on
will.
YouTube, and you can buy it as a film from Amazon. And there are
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of related things that go on with this. And sort of similar to hemp, the fungi have a really wide range of products.
That's
It's not
right.
it's not just the edible mushrooms. There's just an extensive array of things that can be done with mushroom products.
Well, you
Everything
got
from
me thinking, with this canopy arrangement I was talking about, you have some shorter plants and some taller plants in your multi-species. So the idea is you get some plants up and growing and create some sort of a canopy, and then the other plants grow above that. But one of the things you're doing is you're shading that soil and you're keeping the soil temperature lower. And that does a couple of wonderful things. First, you get less evaporation, so you maintain the moisture longer, but you get the cooler temperatures of the soil, which allow for, there's a curve on nutrient uptake. The
Mhm.
more that temperature goes up, the nutrient uptake of the plants just falls off a cliff. But I'm wondering, as you're talking, I hadn't thought about the fungi aspect because you got a cool, damp environment down there. What else is going on there that we have no idea, that we just have no clue? There's an endless amount of experiments we could run here.
Well, I don't know if you were ever aware of them or not, but one of the first companies um, in this entire country that actually got into this was a small company in Minnesota called Ringer Research.
Oh, I've never heard of them.
Well, they didn't make it. They didn't have a marketing mind. They had a scientific and biological mind, but they didn't have a marketing mind for their product, unfortunately. But what they were doing is they were analyzing healthy soil profiles for bacteria,
Hmm.
soil bacteria. And they were growing soil bacteria and encapsulating so that the bacteria could be spread out with the actual organic matter that was being tilled back into the soil or which was being grown as a cover crop. And
Yep.
then that was promoting health of the soil and the digestion of the cover crops and
Mhm.
organic fertilizers into compost. So it
Yep.
was sort of like power composting. Uh, and I was a one of the people that went out and actually did experiments with the Ringer Research products on garden plots and soil renovation projects. Uh, I've had a very interesting life. If I die tomorrow, a very interesting life. Okay, but yeah, there's just a wide variety of things that we can do to be creative and to be wise in making our investments into
That's right.
soil and from adding soil bacteria so that you have enough of them to do the work, to adding fungi spores and making sure that you have a proper balance, to adopting new techniques in agriculture. I mean, the days of the row crop are fast fading into the distance, except for certain gigantic field crops.
That's right.
And
Yep.
so,
We talked about the control of the commodity and all that, and it still needs to be managed. That's instead of this CRP, which is crop rotation program, which is set aside your land and do nothing with it, right? Get paid to do nothing. That's where these experiments need to happen. That's where we go to the farmers and say, okay, it looks like the next few years, maybe it would be a good idea to help you set aside 10% of your ground and let's run this experiment there and that experiment there and all these things to benefit one another. Let's not just set that ground aside, which there's nothing wrong with setting it aside for a year or two. I don't have a problem with that. But setting it aside for 20 years and getting paid to do nothing with it, that makes no sense.
No,
So,
and oftentimes these things have products of their own. I mean, like
yes.
if you're doing a mushroom experiment, you're going to get compost out of that. You're going to get whatever product that mushroom mycelium produces. Uh,
Hmm.
Oftentimes you can piggyback programs. Say that
Yep.
you've got a forestry project and you've got a 20-year-old stand of red pine.
Yeah.
Okay, well, then maybe you want to try a mushroom mycelium that encourages growth and health of the red pine species, but also
Mhm.
produces this mushroom that is a natural insecticide that does not stay in the environment.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
so you don't have to worry about it being on your soil forever and ever. It's there for a season and it's gone.
Yeah.
There are
All we got to do is just think about this a little bit, just a little bit of planning, a little bit of thought. I was going to tell you a story on the biochar, so I have to tell this. So maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, I was thinking, oh, I want to try some biochar. So I got a 55-gallon barrel, and I don't know if anybody knows how you make biochar, but I got a 55-gallon barrel and a 30-gallon barrel. And what you do is you get the wood in the 30-gallon barrel and you get the fire going, and then you want to suffocate it. So what you're doing is you're suffocating that wood, and it'll just sit there and just the red charring. It'll just sit there and make charcoal effectively. So I
Mhm.
did this. All right, I rigged up this concoction and I did this, and I realized, I think this is wonderful, and this will work really good for the garden. But I'm looking at the 60-acre field there, and I'm saying 55-gallon barrel is not going to cut it.
No, but if you were to set up a biochar facility that was
Yes.
actually an industrial size operation, and
Yes.
you were to make this a mobile unit, and
Yep.
you were to bring it into play with industrial scale forestry projects where you have lumber that's being with scrap wood and
Mhm.
branches and sawdust and all this other stuff that we have that becomes a waste product that has to
Yeah.
be somehow or other composted or made into something. If we
Or
were
it
to
goes to a
combine,
dump.
right,
Yep.
so if we were to combine biochar processing with wood processing, with forestry wood production processes, we'd have the best of both worlds, and we would have something that would fit that 60-acre field.
That's right. There is a company that I researched that just reminded me when you mentioned that there was a company out in the Denver area, east of Denver, Colorado, that was doing maybe something along those lines. I'm gonna have to look back into that. I know they were doing a fixed industrial biochar facility, but it was a fixed facility.
Mm-hmm.
I like the mobile idea is just, like you said, you can get to the field and you can get to the forestry. We need to clean through the forest to cull them out, right?
Right.
There's a lot of just forestry maintenance. Well, wow.
But I spent all winter doing forestry maintenance. We just got rid of like 10 loads of, you know, trailer loads of gigantic piles, brush piles. And
So we needed a little mini, or not a mini, but a smaller biochar machine for you there, because you would have got your forest maintenance completed, and your garden would be fabulous, all
right,
at the same time.
right. And, if you could do it, biochar is something that is entirely scalable. You could
Yeah.
have something for the hobbyist, who has an acre lot that
Right.
just wants to make enough biochar for their own use. You could
Right.
do something at a community scale where you had a biochar facility and everybody drags their, scrap
Mhm.
wood and stuff and uses it to make biochar and then sells it as a product at a reduced rate to the community members.
Yep. Yep.
Uh, there are lots of different things that could be done. It could be done on an industrial scale. Some of these big tree companies, the ones that go out and actually produce lumber. It's a
Hmm.
natural for them because, I mean, no matter what, they have to get rid of the slash. And right
Yep.
now they're spending millions of dollars on big machines, tub grinders, and that sort of thing.
That's right.
Why not produce it into a usable product that they could then resell,
Yep.
and benefit the gardeners and the farmers?
It's amazing when we start to, because what we're doing here is we're saying if we get the regulations and the 80 million 80 million pages of statutes out of the way that don't apply to us, we can do some wonderful things. Is really what it boils down to. And we get we get the banking, and we get all these pieces are going to start to come together here real quickly. And it just opens up this world of brainstorming and all these possibilities. And this is just one little area, but it's I think it's this way in all the areas, isn't it? That grassroots, getting minds together,
Right.
coordinating, experimenting, all that.
Well, like in my home state, there are a limited number of appropriately sloped south-facing hills that
Yeah.
have the right kind of, soil that can be used to create really beautiful, productive orchards. Okay,
Hmm.
so limiting the amount of fruit that you produce doesn't really make a lot of sense if it can be used locally.
Right.
I mean, why should we be paying the freight and refrigeration and
Yeah.
point of production to consumer costs that we're paying when we could produce a lot of our own fruit and have a much shorter radius of from production to consumer,
Yep.
and the quality of the fruit would be better. The
Yep.
variety of fruit that we could produce would be astronomically increased. I
Yep.
mean, I can tell you right now that my mother had a Duchess apple tree,
Hmm.
and it produced little golden apples that were no bigger than that, and just maybe twice the size of a crab apple. Okay.
Uh-huh.
They were golden and they had these fine little red stripes when they were ripe. And they were the most delicious things you ever tasted, fresh or made into sauce.
Yeah.
They weren't any good for apple pie because they were too soft. They would just
Right.
disintegrate into sauce.
Right.
But they were the most delicious apples. The big problem with them is they don't ship well.
Ah.
And they only last for about 3 weeks
Mm-hmm.
under refrigeration.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those things. They grow really well in Wisconsin. They're well adapted to the climate. They're
Mm-hmm.
delicious, but they only have about a 3 week lifespan. And you either get them to the market or you don't.
You know? Yeah.
And that's the drawback. And
Yeah.
as a result, home orchardists have been growing these things for 300 years and they love them and the kids love them and it's a great treat, but the rest of the world never gets a chance to taste what they're missing.
Right.
And we could correct that if we would correct our farm to market or orchard to market um, web of our,
Mm-hmm.
well, our chain of transport and our modes of transport.
Yeah. All our logistics. Yeah.
Right. If we shorten the chain of between the farm and the market,
Yep.
then it becomes possible for people to enjoy and have and experience all of these kind of specialty things that you never see in the marketplace because of conditions like that.
Well, you start to get, as something really interesting, you start to get regionality and seasonality mixed together or combined.
Mm-hmm.
And really, if you think about it, that's great for the locals in that area, but that's also tourism. Wouldn't it be neat? Oh, the such and such apples are in season, up in Wisconsin at this time of year.
Right.
Guess what? People travel up there to have them.
Well, that's what they do in Door County. They've had a mini agricultural phenomenon in Door County for generations. Now, Door County in Wisconsin is the thumb of the mitten that juts out between the Great Lakes.
Yeah.
And because it's between the Great Lakes, it has a microclimate that's much warmer, than the water has that effect on the microclimate there. So they can grow beautiful cherries in Door County. And that's every July, everybody makes a beeline for Door County. You've suddenly got everybody from young kids on motorcycles and backpack tents to giant motorhomes showing up and yachts coming into Egg Harbor with people that are there for the cherries.
Yeah, we've lost a lot of that. That's a great example that's still there, but I think, probably 150 years ago, you wouldn't have been able to travel as far, but there would have been those regionality things. People would have known, maybe 2 or 3 counties over, they're going to be harvesting such and such, come September, and we're going to make our way over there.
and even crops that are not as sought after and special and lovely as cherries, they become a seasonal a draw for agricultural communities. Like we have the Ramsey Potato Fest.
Yeah.
And, this little tiny town and, a lot of potato farmers and producing beautiful, beautiful potatoes. Mm-hmm. So they had an annual event, the Ramsey Potato Festival, and it was so much fun.
Yeah.
And it was just based around baked potatoes and everything that you could possibly put on baked potatoes. And because the potato harvest was at the tail end of the sweet corn harvest, they would also boil up lots of sweet corn. And so here, people would come for miles around and, sit at these big long tables and just belly up and eat baked potatoes and sweet corn and homemade beer. And people can look down on me and snark all they want and think that I'm a hick, but I enjoyed this. I enjoyed going to these little farm festivals and, taking part in the seasonal wealth of our earth.
Yeah.
And I think that anyone who really experienced it would come to value it. And part of the problem that we have is a lack of communication between urban and rural.
Yeah.
I've taken kids out of inner city environments, and they think that meat just comes in these plastic packages. They have no idea of what goes into raising a cow to produce milk. They have no idea what goes into making cheese. They don't know where potatoes come from. I mean, they are totally zoned out in this fry-by kind of weird world where everything comes from McDonald's and it's packaged in cardboard and paper, and they have no idea. And
if they don't know, they can't appreciate it. And if they can't appreciate it, they have no concept of quality food and not quality food. GMO versus organic, and just the care that goes into, the energy that we all know that you can talk to a plant and a plant will behave positively, right? It's no different with raising cattle or growing a big field full of crops. Your energy still, exudes out onto those animals, into those plants. And these big monocrop there's no positive energy there. It's just running a tractor over it as fast as it can to produce the product. There's no positive energy left there.
No, there isn't. But the point about the urban kids coming out into the rural areas and getting to experience rural life and getting to do some things, even if it's just, for a couple of weeks in the summer, uh, that will have a huge impact on how they view the world and what they value in the world. And it
That's
may
right.
even mean that some of the urban kids come out and take up life in the rural areas. But
Yep.
the important thing is the communication so that they understand how important this is. And
Yep.
they get some experience with it so that, they've actually petted a cow's nose so
Right.
that they actually know what cow manure smells like. So that they,
Right.
they see chickens that are in a
Yep.
natural chicken environment, you know. They need to see
Well,
these things. And there needs to be this kind of communication between urban and rural,
yep.
because what we're getting, uh, part of what is decaying our cities and decaying our culture is that we've lost connection to the earth.
Right.
And these kids are not at fault for that. They're growing
Yep.
up in an environment which is totally urbanized.
Yep.
They don't know what clean water tastes like, right? They have no
Yep.
idea. They think flowers come from buckets at the supermarket. They have no concept. They have no idea what it's like to go swimming in a natural lake.
Yep.
All they know is swimming pools. And so when it comes time to making decisions for the whole country, you have these giant urban populations against the more sparsely populated but larger rural areas.
Yep.
And it becomes a fight
Yep.
between the urban areas sucking everything in, for their big projects and their welfare programs and all of that, versus the rural areas, which are the backbone that's producing
Yep.
everything that has to be trucked into these urban areas and provided to these urban areas. So there
Yep.
has to be an effort on the part of the government to increase the interface and the understanding between urban and rural. California is one of our worst spots for this because you've got one huge urban area in the Bay, and then you've got another huge urban area in LA.
Yep.
And those two huge urban areas dictate the dynamics of politics in the entire state.
Yep.
But in between, you have some of the most valuable agricultural land in the country,
That's right.
which is a resource that cannot be reclaimed, it cannot be replaced.
Right.
And we should, as a country, be focused on educating those large urban populations about the actual value of the rural land in terms of how it contributes to their benefit and
Yep.
why they have a stake in preserving and protecting it.
Yep.
And also opening up the experience of rural life to urban people so that they
Mhm.
know and have things that they associate with that they experience, that they value.
That's right.
Um, you know, I will never forget taking a little girl from Milwaukee who had grown up in inner city Milwaukee uh, on just a brief little road trip of like 100 miles. I think she was probably 10, and she had never really been out in the country. And, we come up on this, basically a hobby farm that was growing flowers.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had a field of imperial roses, the big purple roses that they grow
Uh-huh.
the perfume industry,
Yeah.
and it smelled like heaven. She's standing among these rose bushes up over her head, with these giant rose blossoms that smell like heaven. And
Yeah.
she's just stunned. It's a reality beyond her wildest imagining. I mean, if I had taken her to Oz, she couldn't have been more amazed. And so kids need that experience.
That probably
They
had
need,
such a profound impact on her. I mean, just not just that day, but going forward, that had to have such a profound impact on her.
sure. And, she got to play with puppies, a
Hmm.
whole bunch of puppies, 6, 7 puppies at once, and have their little furry noses and wiggly tails and to, interact with them and hold them. And she never had that experience either.
Yeah.
Kids need this. It
Living
doesn't matter.
animals.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they need to
Like your
be.
cat, the living, breathing cat, living, breathing cows, living, breathing chickens, puppies. They all have what most people like that don't realize is those animals do have feelings. You know, that
And
they,
yes,
yeah,
they have.
they just don't realize it. And I think if they would appreciate, like what you're saying, if they would appreciate that more. And the other challenge with having animals, as you are well aware, growing up with it, there's two things that happen with animals. You have life and you have death. And it's hard. It's hard having animals. The death side of that is the part that never gets easy, but it's just part of it. And you when you take for granted, you don't realize what these people that raise these animals go through emotionally. They're the caretakers. They're the genesis, right? We're the caretakers. That's our job. And there's a lot to it. And I think when people interact with that, they realize, oh my gosh, that's a living animal. It needs
Right.
cared for. It actually has feelings.
It has a
It's not,
personality.
it has a personality. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And, some of the costs, even with animals like horses that are not used as food animals,
Right.
as meat animals, um, they retire. They get to a point where they can no longer pull a wagon. They get to a
Hmm.
point where they can no longer pull a plow or do anything much. Then
Hmm.
and they're just elderly hay burners, right?
Yep. Yep.
But they still need a place and they still need to be cared for.
That's
So,
right.
there are things about animal husbandry that are not obvious to people
That's
who
right.
are not ever exposed to it.
Yep.
I don't know any child who has ever taken a handful of grain and thrown it on the ground for chickens and who has been in a chicken yard when there were little chicks out there bobbling around. I
Yeah.
don't think anyone who has ever experienced that uh, can divorce that from the drumstick that they're eating, right?
That's right. That's right.
And so there's a connection that we're losing in the
Yep.
urban areas that understands what
Yep.
the rural areas represent and how important
Yep.
those rural areas really are. And so I think that one of the things going forward for our government is to promote that urban rural interface
Yep.
and to promote programs and activities that bring urban kids out into the country for positive experiences.
Yep.
And, maybe it's as simple as, you know, bringing together a more in tune version of Future Farmers of America
Hmm.
with city kids and having projects, you know, or working with summer camp operations where kids are supposed to go out into the country. Well, let them go out into the real country, and instead of having fake bows and arrows and wandering around and pretending that they're going around it, just get out there and really start looking around at, oh, that's a forest, ha, and what
Yeah.
kinds of animals and plants can we expect in this forest?
Yep.
There's so much that we could
There
share,
is.
and in sharing it, develop a more cohesive culture.
You talking about this, I'm just thinking about the farmers that I know, of course, and they would love this idea. But the system that they've been put in, this is where we can correct this, but the system been put under is their insurance man would say, no, you can't do that. What if one of those kids got hurt? You know, what if
Well,
this, what if that? We just need that mentality out of the way.
yes,
That's the holdup because I know the farmers would love to do stuff like this. They love that. All the farmers you've been around, they love showing off what they do, right?
well, and look at the old-fashioned hay rides and sleigh rides.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, that could be another form of an active way of promoting this kind of understanding and also bringing in extra income during
that's right.
the seasons of the year when you're not actively growing a crop. You could
Yep,
be, doing these other things that just enrich life for everybody
yep,
and making a profit off of your fallow time,
yep.
your
That's right.
yearly cycle.
That's your vertical integration, right?
You can laugh, but one time I had a group of fourth graders, and I brought them out for to my house for the annual tool day. And tool day, in case anybody needs to know, is when rural people have all these different implements that they use, right? They've got fan rakes, they've got comb rakes, they've got shovels of 3 or 4 different kinds at least. They've got axes, they've got saws, they've all this stuff needs to be cleaned, and the rust, if there's any, needs to be taken off. It needs to be sharpened, it needs to be oiled, and traditionally you just have a day in the spring and in the fall when you get serious about cleaning all these farm implements and tools
Yep,
and oiling them up and getting them ready for storage, right? Or getting them ready for use, right?
yep.
So here are all these kids learning how to use a grindstone, how do all the different kinds of sharpening stones there are, the different kinds of oils that you use on
Yep.
these stones. It totally blew their mind.
And
And then,
probably got dirty for the first time, real dirty.
right, and then washing your hands. What
Yeah,
kind of soap do you use? You got some pumice soap. Oh, well, that's a whole new experience. Yeah,
yeah.
and it connects them to the real world, and it teaches them useful skills, because now these kids will be able to go to a hardware store and
Yep,
pick out a couple sharpening stones and the appropriate oil, and they'll be able to sharpen their own kitchen knives or
yep,
their scissors. You know, these are things that they connect the individual to life.
yep,
They empower the individual. They enable the individual to be independent and not depend upon machines and, you know, specialized services
yep.
to do everything for them.
There's a satisfaction that comes with stuff like that that you just can't explain to somebody until they do it. They just have to experience it. You can't describe it to them. And yeah.
Right.
Uh-oh. So I will probably never be allowed to host the podcast again because I have completely ignored comments and questions. So I apologize for that. Let's see. Barbara says the people that hold positions in the assemblies are using terms such as, oh, here, I'll let you take this one. Hannah, that looks like one for you.
Pro tempore is just basically Latin for temporary. And it's true, they do use this in the municipal government because guess what? It's Roman. So they use Latin words all the time. Uh, that said, we shouldn't be prejudiced too much against obvious things that have obvious meaning, like temporary, right? But we could just say temporary the temporary uh, ombudsman, or the provisional is another word, provisional ombudsman. That sounds like territorial language, which it is, comes from the military. But it's all driving at the same thing, that these are offices that are functioning for a period of time in transition, where ultimately there are going to be proper elections that a person holds for a specific term. Okay, so um, I think it's more important that we communicate, and communicate honestly and clearly, than what the specific word is, or whether we use a Latin term or we use a German term or we use as long as everybody knows what it means. And that's the hard part, because you really don't know if people understand what these Latin words mean. And so we need to find English substitutes and equivalents so that we can be sure that they understand that pro tempore means temporary, and in what sense temporary. De facto, I mean, there's another foreign word that is being used in a very specific legal sense. And we mean that it is by appearance. It appears to be the government, but it really isn't. In this case, it's a corporation that provides governmental services under contract. Okay, so it appears to be the government. It is there doing this service, right? But it's not really the government. It's a subcontractor of the government. And so I think you have to look at each one of those kinds of terms and make sure that everybody understands what they mean. Otherwise, they could get confused. And, there are some people who make this big distinction between de facto and de jure, right? That's really kind of a false paradigm. What we really have to get down to is employer and employee.
That's simpler.
Hello, Argentina.
Oh.
I don't know what I'm supposed to reply to, but I suppose someone will ship it on to me. My email is avanavon@gmail.com. AVANNAVON@gmail.com.
I have a question that I remember now that came from one of our Kansas Assembly meetings, and it is in regards to the certificate of assumed name document that we do. And there's a paragraph in there. It's using the word severity, and we were questioning, should that? And I know that's putting you on the spot. But it was talking about effectively title order of the grantee at any time, past and present or future, shall be liable severally and jointly to this certificate as an affidavit of obligation in the normal commercial sense, and as such is severity representing accounts receivable. Should that be security instead of severity?
It should be severity, but the severity is a liability. Okay, so it has meaning within the context of the paragraph.
Okay, so it's saying that if I read that as a liability representing accounts receivable. Okay, all right.
It's just an old legal, it's one of those words that isn't used very often, but a liability is a severity. And it means basically that you are held liable to pay or to make amends or recompense or restitution if you violate the
Yeah,
the
that
terms
makes
of
no. When I read it that way, you're right. Okay. Thank you. I think that answered that. That was an easy one.
I wish they
Oh,
all were.
yeah, no doubt. Niti, our moderators, do we have any other questions? Seems how I have completely ignored them all. I don't see anything else coming up.
Oh, well.
Oh, here we go. Banking.
Well, I think it's natural that people are looking at their accounts and they're looking at these monthly distributions in terms of, okay, well, that was in February. Where's my March distribution? Um, and you should be aware that those distributions are they're going through a development where it will be possible where once a month you just push a button and boom, everybody who's eligible gets the deposit, right? And it has to go through that so that we can scale up and be ready to help a lot more people, right? When we first began making those distributions, it was all in lists, sort of like email lists. And so, 100 people would get theirs. The people of Nebraska would get theirs. The people from Vermont would get theirs. And it was much more labor intensive, and we couldn't scale things up to deal with thousands or hundreds of thousands of people without a considerable more amount of computer programming and software development. So now we're at the point where we're almost at that one touch button. And that's why things have been kind of, 1 month you'll get your distribution, and then it might be 2 months before you see another distribution of 2 months worth, and things like that. But that's getting worked out. That's part of what's been happening here behind the scenes. So you can expect another distribution that'll be 2 or even maybe 3 months worth of distributions, and everybody will get it all at once. And all you'll see on your screen is that you got it. And it won't be apparent to you that, oh, everybody got it. Oh, and that's a change, because before it was just group by group by group. But of course, you weren't aware of that, you see. So some of these computer changes are vast and they're difficult to attain, but you as the end user don't see it.
Well, and I always say it's this little thing of you're just doing something that's never been done before. What's the big deal?
There's no software for it. It's never been done before. And,
Yeah,
and nobody has had this sort of security protocol
right,
or obligation to make sure that the people who receive this distribution are standing on the land and soil and are eligible to
right.
receive this distribution. And so we have all these security protocols and things that have to be built. And Gregg
Yeah.
knows. He's a programmer. He knows.
It's tough. It's difficult. You just to get something functional is one thing. To get something functional and well oiled and working perfectly is an entirely different thing. They always say the devil's in the details, right? But it's that last 2% or 3% of something that takes 90% of the time to complete.
Right. Well, and just consider this. We don't use names that use a middle initial unless that is actually all that the person has as
Their
a
name.
middle name.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there are people out there who have a name like Joseph M. Baker.
That's the name.
And that's it. There's no Michael, Mark, or Malcolm.
Right.
All it is an M is the middle name. Okay, so we don't have that form of name except in those rare instances. But we have to account for that in our system.
Yep. Yep.
So they're just
All these very,
darker.
and then you get into the world, the global environment, and there's going to be a lot of different customs and such that, we're used to three name Gregory Wayne Clarkson. The rest of the world doesn't necessarily do it that way. And I
Right,
suspect India is one, as an example, we were talking about India to begin with. I would think
right.
that would be a really, really, a lot of variations that would come out of
Yeah,
a country like
yes. Especially when you have different naming conventions for Hindus and Muslims.
that. Yeah.
And when you have different, look at Spain. Uh, the Spanish way of issuing a family name is completely different than the British way of doing it.
Yeah. Right.
So,
Right.
they have their mothers included in their family names.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Niti was telling me about some of the stuff that yeah, where the mother is tied into there, and I'd never heard of that before. It's entirely different.
yeah, it is, and uh, we we have to gear up and be able to adapt
Yeah.
and yet be honest and precise about what a person's name is. So instead of having maybe a maximum of 15 characters or 20 characters or whatever for an English name, we might have to have a character spread of 35 characters for a Spanish name. I mean,
Yeah.
by the time you get Rene Emmanuel Rodriguez e Santiago, I mean, it's a whole different world. And yet we need to be able to serve and help these people too. So
Yeah.
all of that goes into the programming that we're involved in, and it's a huge job. It's an unimaginable job,
Yeah.
and it has taken considerable time to prepare a system that is aimed at reaching and serving 8 billion living people.
Yeah. And
Because
once you take something from development to production, they're two totally different environments and two totally different worlds. In development, you're trying to work out these things like what you're saying, and then you go into production. And while you can always update things to correct them, once you go into production, you're in production, and now you're interfacing with real living people out there. And that becomes a job unto itself, let alone the continual development of the system. So
yeah,
it's
and imagine, remember, I've told people this, but they don't necessarily always get it. Global was meant to be a bank's bank.
right,
It was supposed to be working with other banks.
right.
It wasn't supposed to be delivering retail type services to end user accounts. It
It's an
wasn't built,
entirely different world.
right. It was not initially built to be, doing transactions for Ludmilla Finkenmeyer in, Butler, Pennsylvania. It was not meant to be serving Anna Maria Reisinger in Big Lake, Alaska. It was meant to be a bank's bank that was interacting and working with other banks.
Right.
And so when we came to the conclusion that, hey, we have to expand to retail service,
Yeah.
it was an absolutely gobstoppering moment of sheer terror. Just say, oh my God, we're actually going to have to do this from the retail level
All the way to the
all the way up to the sovereign treasury level. I mean,
sometimes certain things, when you get into these things, had you known everything when you started, you would have never proceeded. That's probably a perfect example of it. Yeah.
no, the minutiae of creation isn't all that interesting. It isn't. But sometimes people need to be aware of it and know it so that they don't get impatient and just sit and stew and make suppositions and out of ignorance and impatience,
Yeah.
assume things. We would rather them know just how difficult this was and is. The fact that we're uh, in the final throes of having a workable system that can be applied worldwide should be a source of great joy. But it should also be a source of great, even stunned appreciation for what our programmers and IT people have gone through to not only scale up to serve a retail market, but to scale up to serve a retail market that serves 8 billion people all over this planet. It's a mind-boggling achievement. It's
184, 185 currencies, I think I've heard you say before, exchangeable. I mean,
in
that's
real
just mind-boggling right there.
in real time.
Yeah, in real time. Wow.
So that when you walk into your hardware store in Lampasas, Texas, and you go to the tractor store and you want to buy 50 pounds of dog food,
Hmm. You buy it. Yep.
that's
Yeah.
magic, folks. That's an incredible accomplishment. And it's
Yeah,
been
it is.
done using the QRC code, which, for those of you who are not familiar with QRC code, has a lot more information in it.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder to hack or um, steal from than the barcode.
Yep. Yep. There was Niti, there was a comment about a tax stamp still available in Kansas, and I was just going to maybe pull that a little bit. I don't know. I guess I don't know what that means. Uh,
They still have stamp taxes.
okay. Wow.
Have you, if you go into a liquor store, I'm sure you've seen those.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yep. Yep.
That,
The wrap over the top. Yep. Okay.
right.
Huh. Wow. Okay. Interesting.
And one other question that people come up, what can those 4 states who are assembled? Well, they can do the same thing that all of the states that are in general assembly can do, is they can start making their priorities known to their state legislatures. Our actual job as states is to tell our employees what to do. What do we want to pay for? What do we not want to pay for? What are our concerns that are not being addressed by the state legislatures? How are the state legislatures failing to meet our standards of performance? You know, there are things in your state that your people are aware of in their local areas, like bridges that need help and repair and, that should be checked over for safety. There are all sorts of things that the state assemblies are supposed to be telling the state legislatures and the state trust managers. So, that's our job. We're the employers. We're supposed to be telling our employees what we want done, how much we want done, where we want the emphasis, what concerns us, what does not concern us. I mean, our state legislatures should have been right there at the forefront saying, no, we don't care what goes on in somebody's bedroom among consenting adults. We are now done with that topic, and we're certainly not legislating anything about it, okay? Our state legislatures are supposed to be marching to the beat of the state assemblies, and that hasn't been happening because the state assemblies haven't been talking. They haven't been in session. They haven't told the state legislatures anything in 150 years. But that's your role. And I keep trying to get that across to people. everyone wants to stand around and beat and batter the public employees around the head and neck. That's not it. What you do is you tell your employees what you want. That's your job. And you haven't been doing your job for 150 years. So don't overly blame them for going off in political sidetracks and bunny rabbit holes. They don't know what they're doing. They're employees that have been left in charge of the shop.
What is that communications medium for telling them? Is that noticing them? What is what? I,
A
you
letter
just
of instruction.
that's right. Yeah, as simple as a letter.
A letter of instruction.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gold and silver is a mark of international trade. Anytime that you see gold and silver seals, that is international trade, and it may be an admiralty or it may be on land as trade. Okay, but the safest thing to do if you don't understand what you're doing with seals is to leave them off.
Yeah.
Same thing with raised seals. If you don't know what you're doing, don't add a raised seal. Okay, this is old stuff. I very much doubt that you're going to need this in the coming world, because all of that pomp and circumstance and sort of ritualistic, all that stuff, I think, is not going to be needed. And it just kind of gums up the works now because nobody understands it. Nobody is educated. I mean, you're talking about maybe 500 Jesuits worldwide, and maybe 10,000 magistrate judges would pay any attention to anything about that at all. So, I just don't think it's worth the time and effort and angst to, try to teach everybody everything about what color of ink to use and what color of ribbon to bind something with. I don't see any point in doing it, because I don't think that world is going to survive the changeover that we're facing and transitioning into right now. We'll still have jurisdictions, we'll still have specialties of law, but as convenient as it is to use blue to signify the sea and red to signify the land, it's been hundreds of years since that's been common practice. And, as well, like deed polls, if you're dealing with, say, the Vatican Chancery Court, and you're going to issue a deed poll, it's worth looking up the actual size, shape, dimension, color. What color can you use to sign it? What are the requirements of that document? But otherwise, heck, most of these people don't even know the jurisdictions exist, much less what all the conventions of the jurisdictions are.
Yeah, it just seems like if you don't know what you're doing, you might get yourself into trouble, as my granddad used to tell me.
No, it's not compromising anything on those documents, because those are international documents. You're acting in the international jurisdiction, and that's all well and good. If I thought it was dangerous or that it was going to affect anything, I wouldn't be saying what I'm saying. I'm literally telling you the truth. The people you are dealing with, by and large, do not even know what jurisdiction they're operating in. The only time I've ever seen them use a seal appropriately is when they certify birth certificates. That's it. Wow. I have never seen them use them appropriately in any other transaction or venue. And they when they come through and they certify birth certificates, the actual state trust officer, who's different than anybody you ever heard of before, okay, will come through with a big gold seal, and it's embossed and it's very fancy. And that is the only context that they really do man up and follow the conventions for those sorts of things.
Wow. We had quite a weekend, didn't we? With the Pope
Wow.
passing and Klaus Schwab resigning
And J.D. Vance showing up to visit the Pope.
yeah.
Oh, yeah. And the UN trying to pass the Pact for the Future. And
all on Easter weekend. Imagine that.
well, thank God for the rat watchers.
Yeah.
Thank God for the people that stayed awake and tracked what was going on at the UN on Easter weekend.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you had some really good articles that I saw on Paul's site anyway yesterday, and I got through all of those, and that was one of them. It just exactly. It just shows what the rats they are. Easter weekend. That's just terrible.
Well, why not? Because
exactly.
they passed the Federal Reserve Act on Christmas Eve.
That's right. I forgot about that. Yep.
Oh, well, my grandmother didn't forget. She griped about that her entire life, from 1913 to 1963 when she died. Now for 50 years, every once in a while, she'd come out at least 2 or 3 times a year. She was observed to me that look at what they did and look at when they did it. Yep. And that was a clue to her that they were likely to be using the same kinds of tactics to try to push off other outrageous BS. And she was right. She was absolutely right. There they are. Yep. Easter weekend, trying to pass this off and thinking they're going to get away with it, that everybody's going to be distracted with the holiday and travel and making, Easter dinner and all of that. And nobody's going to notice while they slip this in under the rug. Well, guess what? The rat watchers were there. The rat watchers were there. And God bless the rat watchers, because we need them and we appreciate them. And we just can't say enough, because it was through dedicated rat watching that was caught and responded to promptly. Yeah. Which counts in commerce. And as you will notice, we also took time to put a block in there to prevent them from just, regrouping and coming back next week with another, rehash of the same garbage.
Right. Yep. Yeah. It's never gonna end, is it? They're just gonna keep trying and trying and trying, but
no,
we just gotta get strong. What's that?
I think what's going to happen is they're going to be definitively embarrassed and beaten. And everybody's going to be aware of who they are and what their tactics are. And once that happens, then everybody in the entire world will be watching them. And they won't be able to twitch a whisker without them being on the radar and having everybody analyzing what they're doing and why they're doing it and what kind of imbroglio are they now trying to gin up and for what purpose. And, they're on the record with a whole bunch of fraud schemes that they have historically done. They're not going to be able to do those again, because everybody's going to be aware of them. They won't be able to use the all capital letters gambit, because everybody will be aware of it. They won't be able to use this conferring of citizenship obligations, because everyone's going to be aware of how they misused and abused and pulled off their 14th Amendment citizenship, and how they used that to enslave the former Black plantation slaves to pay off the public debt.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all of that is going to become outrageous. It's going, when people really understand what they've done and how they've done it, it's not just going to be a matter of outrage. It's going to be a matter of intelligence, of
Yeah.
realizing, just like my grandmother realized, those lousy, dirty skunks, deliberately passed this on Christmas Eve. Well, that was enough for us 3 generations later to be alert and watching for them to do something on other holidays like
Yep.
Easter.
Yep.
And again, thank God for the rat watchers, and thank God for the consciousness of knowing that this is when they try to pull these things. To watch them even more carefully on the weekends and on the holidays than on during the regular work week.
Yep. The awakening is real. People are more and more people are becoming more awake. This is a great way to put it. It's it almost then in that case it almost gets fun because every time they try to move, they nailed them. Yep.
Yep, I love my rat watchers. I
Yep.
thank them. Um, yeah, I think as more people think more about money and about transactions and the way that they have used promissory notes,
Mm-hmm.
indefinite IOUs as a form of tender, they're going to be so completely outraged. They're going to be so fed up. And,
Yep.
the big question in everybody's mind shouldn't be, what did they do or how did they do it? Because actually, that's right in front of our noses once we look.
Yep.
The question in our mind should be, why didn't we look?
Yep.
Why didn't we pay attention to something as fundamental and important as what we're using for money?
Yep.
I went through that explanation in the article called "Exiting from Evil." Um, it, anyway, it just observed the dynamics of what we've been doing, how we've been accepting these promissory notes, which aren't even actual enforceable promissory notes. They're not negotiable instruments at all. And we've been accepting them in exchange for actual goods and services.
Yep.
Well, when you accept an IOU that doesn't even have a date when it's due and doesn't stipulate the form of the payment that it's supposed to be made in, you've got something that's utterly, totally useless and unenforceable. Okay? That's what a Federal Reserve is, a Federal Reserve note. It is not, it's not a negotiable instrument. It's worthless. And we've got lots of court cases that prove it's worthless. It's literally worthless. If you steal a whole suitcase of $100 bills, you can't be charged with theft of anything of value. And that should kind of go,
Yeah.
okay, so, what are we doing here with all this monopoly money? And so we've been exchanging uh, goods and services and been forced to exchange uh, these notes for goods and services for over 100 years. And what happens? Well, when you give this guy a hamburger and he hands you a Federal Reserve note, you become his creditor, right?
Yep.
Because he owes you for he owes you for the burger. All right, so you're his creditor. And so uh, what happens? He goes home, puts on a different hat, and writes a tax bill charged to you for the value of that burger plus interest. So he's turned you into the debtor by
Mm-hmm.
issuing the tax notice and requiring you to pay the debt that he accrued by receiving your goods and services for nothing.
Yeah. I think about your scenario, and then I'll throw in the other element of ingenuity or intellectual property. Think about the when you dream up this idea, and it's just intellectual property, right?
Right.
But it's got value.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody comes in and gives you all these IOUs for it. They get all that for nothing. And
Right.
then like you said, and then here comes this tax thing.
Right. So you wind up paying their taxes,
Yeah, exactly.
which is a gift. They're construing this as a gift.
Right.
And guess what? When you dig into the tax code, Title 26, you find out that the Internal Revenue Service is collecting gift and estate taxes. So you have given them the gift of the hamburger,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And you paid for it by giving them the actual goods and services for nothing.
Yep.
And then you've been taxed for giving them the gift and of the quote unquote gift, how they're misrepresenting it as a gift, right?
Right.
So now you're being taxed 100% the value of that gift plus interest. So you not only pay for the actual goods and services, then you pay 100% tax.
Yep.
And you pay off his debt to you.
Yep. And then when you give them intellectual property, the gift you give them keeps on giving to them.
Right.
An idea is just that. An idea can go on and on and on and on and create, and it's just when you start to, it's like what you said last week. I watched last week's. You start to get into the anger and the various phases. It leads you down that whole path, like you said, and then finally you reach that point where I think I am now, which is I'm in that determined point. All right, I'm just determined now. How do we fix this? How do we do all these wonderful things we were talking about? These research projects and this and that and regenerating the soil. That's where I'm at. Get to that determination, fired up phase, and stop being mad, stop being all that. Let's just move forward.
And focus on the positive.
Yeah.
Don't focus on blaming so much as owning up and taking the wheel. Own up to your own responsibility. One of the most heartbreaking, heart-wrenching, irritating, and unfortunately common responses that I got from the Jesuits was, well, where the hell were you? It's your fault because you didn't step up and take responsibility for your own country and your own government. You didn't tell us what to do.
And they weren't wrong.
It's like I'm telling you, state assemblies, you don't have to be fully seated. You can be in General Assembly and write a letter of instruction to the state legislature and tell them exactly what you want done and what not. You can set their priorities for them. And then it's up to them to set their policies and procedures for the employees. You see how that works? You're the missing employers. You're the ones that have been in absentia for a century and a half. You're the ones that haven't been doing your job, and then you're standing around and complaining about what they're doing. Well, you left them in charge, didn't you? Think about it.
Yeah.
And that's what I got handed to me on more than one occasion in my long correspondences with the Vatican and with church officials and magistrate judges, and their frustration has been, well, basically, So far as we know, you guys walked out of the room in 1861 and we haven't heard from you since. So, own up, take your share of the blame. And they're not wrong.
Right.
They're not wrong. Now, we were not given full disclosure. We were not given the information that we needed. But you would think that when we're faced with a situation like I just described with, give them the hamburger and then pay their bill to you,
Yeah.
pay their bill to you so that you wind up paying for it twice, plus interest. When you start looking around, you start seeing these things, you start going, was everybody in a coma?
It's a different argument now, though, because we do know better. We do know. We can't. The whole thing of not knowing. We may not know everything, but we do know better, and there's no excuse now to not stand up.
Yeah. Well, once you see it, you can't unsee it.
That's right.
There's no going back to being the blameless baby.
Right. The cat's out and he's running around. Yep.
And so, we have to man up. We have to own up. We have to start thinking for ourselves. We have to start doing for ourselves. And we need to tell our public employees what we require of them. What are our priorities? What do we wish to receive back from the public trusts? How is public trust money to be distributed? Where are our securities? Where are our resources? Where are our gold and silver? We've got, starting in the 1870s, the U.S. Navy has been taking our gold and silver offshore for quote unquote safekeeping. Okay, so where the hell have they kept it all this time? Right now it's getting ready to launch, and the big news is going to be there's no gold, or that if there is any gold in Fort Knox, they're going to find out that, there's missing gold. Well, of course there's missing gold. They can't possibly return it fast enough to, this whole thing has been a matter of the Brits borrowing our assets. Okay, they've borrowed our assets, our gold, our silver, our land, our cash, our money, our ideas, our patents, everything. They have borrowed us. They have borrowed our labor and placed labor bonds on us. They have even placed child labor bonds on us as children.
Mm-hmm.
And they have used these things, these instruments, as a means of extracting actual physical assets and the value of our labor from us.
Yep.
And we've been dead asleep at the wheel, just letting them run rampant and get away with these crimes against us, their employers, by the skillful misuse of commercial law on their part and the skillful misuse of admiralty law on their part. Okay, so we've been the victims of lawfare for 150 years. And we've lived in a country that has been illegally occupied by mercenary services pretending to be military services. So there's another huge fraud. Okay, the military was converted to mercenary service under Abraham Lincoln. Mm-hmm. And it has never been lawfully converted back into a military force. So everything these guys have done from 1860 onward has been illegal. All of it. It's all been mercenary actions. And they're not the ones.
And like you
Rich,
said, aside from the things that could never be repaid, loss of our sons and daughters, but the value of the theft, there's not possibly enough silver on earth to ever repay it, a one for one exchange, $1 for 1 ounce. Because it's got to be in the quadrillions or whatever, some huge number you've never used before.
okay, well, even if you believe their statement that we're $37 trillion in debt, right? Even
Right.
if you believe that, and even if you flip it on its head and realize that that's actually $37 trillion credit that we're owed at a minimum, that they're
Right.
admitting,
Right.
there's also
Right.
other things that are not accounted for, like the $65 trillion derivative market that's attached to that $37 trillion admitted debt. Now, if you think that you can just reach out your hand and produce trillions of ounces of refined silver, you're daft.
Yeah.
There is not enough
Think about the
silver.
sheer weight of that. Yeah.
Yeah, right. There is no freaking way in HE double hockey sticks. There
That's right.
is no way that they can ever repay that amount of silver.
And that's just the 37 trillion, like you said, the amount that is published, so-called published, let alone the derivative market. But then just the velocity of the money, the velocity of the IOUs is how I should say it. Every time that happens, it creates another debt. And that velocity, 1,000 times over the course of a year, or whatever that number is just magnifying the 37 trillion by thousands and thousands and thousands, really, if you think about it.
And so there you have it. You've got the situation where the only way that they can recoup their debt is by taxing you to pay for their debt to you.
That's right.
Which is a phony baloney thing to begin with. And so I explained why the federal income tax was enacted as a stopcock on this crazy fraudulent system they created, and how the tax revenue that they bring in is actually used to withdraw currency from the private sector.
Yeah.
So that increases the value of the remaining cash in the market.
Yeah.
And helps to offset the inflation caused by government printing of money above and beyond that the quote unquote government is spending.
Yep.
So
take it from the people so they can't buy anything with it and therefore drive up inflation. That's easy. But
they're actually taking our money from us, right? They're extracting money on one side and they're increasing money on the other side. But it's our private sector that suffers the loss. It's their public sector that gets the gain. Okay, so here's Donald Trump. He's the mule skinner, right? He's got the federal income tax in this hand, and he's got the government printing presses in the other hand. And now he's got the minus and he's got the plus. The problem is that the minus is coming out of your hide and the plus is going into the government coffers. Okay? And they're just totally irresponsible and unaccountable for what they're printing. Okay? So this is the system that we inherited. And, it's worse than it seems because you have to take into account the different kinds of assets that they purloined. It wasn't just our land that they purloined. It wasn't just our silver dollars that they stole. And they did steal them. They purloined them, okay, under force, okay? It wasn't just that they took. It wasn't just our gold that they took. They also took our labor.
Mm-hmm.
And if you read my book, Blood Money, you'll see how they did it.
Yep. I've read that, and that's very good. I would recommend that to everybody on here that hasn't read that. It's very eye-opening. Yeah. Yeah.
I haven't seen Govinda Tidwell's claim ending all birth bonds. I think it's well worthwhile to consider that foreign governments are foreign governments, and they will continue to do what they want with their citizenry. The point is, we're not their citizenry. Okay? So we never authorized birth bonds to begin with. We don't have birth bonds in this country. One of the big differences between America and England is that we don't have birth bonds. One of the big differences between us and the Holy Roman Empire is that we don't have birth bonds. They use these phony persons, these citizens that were considered corporate franchises of these foreign governments as a means to establish birth bonds and then fraudulently impose and enforce them on Americans. That's what they did. In other countries, when a baby is born, that baby has an automatic, obligatory citizenship foisted off on them. And that's what they just tried to do on a world basis this past weekend. They tried to confer world citizenship on everyone on this planet. And they damn near got away with it. Okay? They tried to pull the 14th Amendment citizenship racket on the entire world.
That's the gravity of that is very heavy.
Well, and it just shows they're trying to rewrite and rerun these old fraud schemes that they got away with once, and they think they're going to get away with on a bigger scale again.
Yeah.
So they just tried to pull the same exact scheme.
Yep. Same shit, different day.
It's the new boss, same as the old boss.
There you go.
How are Shannon and Harold doing? Well, you have to understand that this was an opportunity that was made available to us, as a result of our work. It was something we wouldn't have been able to do ourselves, right? And so the big problem, other than limited availability right now, is that it's anywhere between $15,000, $20,000, $30,000. I mean, every time they go into that bath and equipment and everything, and they begin extracting and detoxifying and remodulating and adjusting the frequency and making the innate DNA come forward in this process, every time that you go into that bath, it's $3,000. And there's no way of knowing in advance how many baths that you individually are going to take, to get all this gunk out of you. So, a young person who's healthy, maybe 2 baths. An older person who's not so healthy, maybe 5 baths. And somebody who has, through the course of their lifetime, been extraordinarily exposed to things like vaccines, industrial chemicals, exotic plants and environments, which many U.S. veterans have done. I mean, they've gone all over the world, right? Those guys, they could take 10 baths, There's just no way of knowing in advance until their specific DNA and their specific condition is assessed. And so, and it's not covered under Medicaid or Medicare at this point. It's a private hospital scenario, and it's just really hard at this moment, before we have access to our money and before the opening up of the med bed facilities to get people help at this moment. God knows if I had the money, I'd give it to them out of my own pocket, but I don't have it. And so I know that Trump has, their version of the med bed, which is does not include the detoxification that I know of. It works directly on frequency resonance. Their version of the med bed was supposed to be rolled out in March. Well, here we are, 3 weeks into April. So I don't know what to tell you about their program, except that they're overdue. Okay. This program, this which we call the med bath more than the med bed, even though it uses med bed technology as part of the whole regimen, is I think more intense in certain ways and more permanent. But what you can do right now in support of your family members is you can, number one, go to a health food store and get vitamin B17 and start giving it to them. Go to a local animal food warehouse or a farm supply store like Tractor Supply in Texas and get ivermectin and fenbendazole, or order it off of Amazon. Start giving it to them. 3 days on, 4 days off. 3 days on, 4 days off. What that is for the parasites, the little Phaseolopsis busky parasites that contribute to the biofilm that accelerates the growth of the cancer cells and the colonization into tumors, is what that hits. The other thing is that you can take really hot baths because these little parasites are extremely heat sensitive. And if you take a hot bath, just at the level of being bearable bath, okay, not to burn yourself, but just at the bleeding edge of being bearable, it will stop the activity of the parasites pretty much instantly. And when I'm talking about hot, I mean like hot in a Japanese bathhouse. And I believe the temperature in a typical Japanese bathhouse is something like 111 degrees. So we're not talking about, what you're going to get out of the tap in your average household. And it's the sort of thing where you have to gradually get into that degree of heat. So, you're watching the temperature and you're selectively pouring small amounts of boiling water into an area of the tub away from your flesh to get to that high temperature. The other thing you're going to want to do if you do this to, put the brakes on the cancer is to get it like a shower cap and put ice inside of it and wear it on your head during this process so that your brain case is insulated from the extreme heat in the rest of your body. But as your blood circulates in this hot environment, it will kill those parasites. The other thing, and Russians actually discovered this about 20 years ago, that this thermal treatment would kill cancer. Anyway, but so it's a combination of killing parasites and detoxifying the system and giving yourself the nutrients. Turkey tail mushroom, you can order it from Amazon. Paul Stamets has a company that is actually producing capsules of turkey tail mushroom, and that is what he used to cure his mother's cancer. The other thing about cancer is that there are different kinds of cancer. I mean, depending upon what the tissue is that's being affected, it has different characteristics. So if you've got skin cancer, that's one kind of cancer. If you've got a cancer of the lymph system, then you have a lymphoma. It's a whole different kind of cancer. If you've got bone cancer, if you've got pancreatic cancer, they're all different depending upon the tissue that's affected. And though, you can generally take these pills and they will affect overall, some are more effective than others for different kinds of cancers. It's not a one size fits all, except that we do know that the hot medical bath will significantly slow down and stop the rampant growth and cause it to go into a step back. Okay, it's not a step forward; it's a step back for the cancer to do that. There are other things that you can take. SEAC tea has been around for over 100 years. In the Canadian realm of natural medicine, and that was from the Ojibwe Indians who had been using it for thousands of years. And it's a mix of sheep sorrel and turkey tail and just it's common weeds basically, and it has the effect of making the pain go away, and it has an effect on tumors. So if you have tumors, a tumorous form of cancer, that will help greatly with that kind of cancer. Okay, so SEAC, ESSIAC, SEAC. I always recommend anyone's got cancer take SEAC tea because it's a bland taste. It's not unpleasant, and it helps so many people who have cancer overcome the pain. And chronic pain in and of itself is a downer for your mentality and your will to live, and your biology is affected. So if you can ditch the pain, by all means do it. SEAC tea will help you with the pain if it's a tumor-based cancer. Some cancers, unfortunately, just make you ache all over. And you become a giant, an encapsulated pain. And it's absolutely horrible. I don't know of any really good answers for that kind of pain except kratom, Kratom, kratom. I'm not even sure I'm saying it right, but it's a Asian painkiller that is non-addictive, and it is as strong as heroin and opium. It is extremely strong as a painkiller. And because it's non-addictive, it has that advantage over morphine, for example. And it doesn't have some of the adverse biological kind of poisoning aspects that make your liver work to get rid of it afterwards. So, and it is now available at a lot of cannabis shops are also selling kratom, Kratom. It's available in virtually all the states that have allowed cannabis to be sold. So you can find it in those states. So just being able to escape the pain is a big one. I keep the stuff on hand in case I have people, friends, neighbors, anybody who gets cancer. I turn them on to that so that they are relieved of the burden of the pain, which is, it helps them to maintain a positive attitude, which improves their chances of survival significantly. Okay, so there's that aspect. You want to encourage the body to get rid of whatever is causing the cancer other than the parasites, because the parasites are sort of a secondary thing that always shows up, but whether they actually cause it or if they are just sort of opportunistic is unknown. So the other thing that you can do is to get rid of as much gunk in your system as you can. Like heavy metals are known to be poisonous. Over the course of our lifetime, we all pick up a lot of heavy metals. And it's in part because of the crazy spraying program, the chemtrail program, dumping things like cadmium and strontium and barium on our soil. But you also wind up being exposed to it in many other venues. For many years, they used a mercury amalgam. As crazy as this sounds, they were using mercury, silver, and mercury amalgam for dental fillings. And most of us who are over a certain age remember then that was all there was. If you had a tooth filled, you had a choice between gold or silver amalgam, which had mercury in it. And mercury is incredibly poisonous. So here we had these poisonous fillings in our mouths and didn't even know it. So that's the source of mercury poisoning. We get fluoride dumped on us through the drinking water in most cities. Most even smaller towns have got municipal water services that are, deluged with fluoride and chlorine. Well, it kills all the bacteria and everything, but also it unfortunately kills us. Okay, so we've got fluorine and chlorine in our systems. And we've got exposure to things like cadmium through things like oil paint, colorants, food coloring, just different kinds of glue, welding flux, soldering flux, all these different things that we pretty much take for granted. But over the course of a lifetime, it builds up all these heavy metals in our systems. And those are poisons that are just little poison centers going, poison, what's here, poison, 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 okay? So we want to get rid of those. Well, how do you get rid of them? One of the best ways is these little Japanese detox foot pads that use zeolite and biotin to extract the heavy metals through your skin. And this is like a miniature version of what they're doing with the med baths. It's not nearly as efficient. It doesn't take out the vast quantities of gunk that the med bath will, but it takes it out consistently. And let's face it, if all you're getting out is a couple of tablespoons worth of gunk every day, at least you're getting a couple tablespoons of gunk out every day. And over time, it's going to add up to a significant amount. So it's worth doing if that's the only way that you have available to you to get the effect. It's worth doing. And just a second, I have some of these things, so I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, this just happens to be the brand of this that we have locally available in Alaska. It's called Detox Foot Patches, and it was pioneered again in Japan. And what it consists of is a thing sort of like a bandage, okay? And it has a peel off back, and it has an adhesive on the other side of this soft cloth like fabric. All right. And then here, notice all in Japanese, we have this little packet, and it's a paper packet using a paper sort of like a tea bag fabric, you know, that kind of, paper pack. And in here, you've got the biotite, the zeolite, and wood vinegar. Okay, so the wood vinegar acts to draw the goop through your skin. Okay, and you put this, you know, you've got this little band-aid like thing that has an adhesive backing on it. Once you pull this wax paper off, you've got this little paper packet, and once you take it out of the cellophane, it's sort of like a tea bag. You stick it on the back here like this, so that it looks like a Band-Aid by the time you're done with it. And this is all sticky around the edges, right? You just turn that over and you slap it on the bottom of your foot when you go to bed. And all night long, it's just drawing gunk out. You can put it other places too. You could put it on your forearm, or you could put it on, you know, your shoulder, or, you know, whatever was most comfortable for you. They like to use the feet because the feet naturally have a, you know, gravity just pulls everything down to the feet. So they recommend doing it on your feet, but you can do it other places too if there's some reason why it doesn't work for you to have it on your feet. Anyway, the wood, the powdered wood vinegar in the packet acts as sort of a drawing substance, and it actually then will turn dark brown or black or even blue or green, depending on what kind of gunk you've got in your body. So, and this costs about $20 in Alaska, so it's probably, I don't know, maybe $12 in the lower 48 for 10 patches. So $60 if you do it every night for a month. And every time that you do it, you're getting more gunk out of your body. Another thing that you can do rather inexpensively for about $100 is you can get an ionic foot bath. And what this does is it circulates ionized water around your feet, and you have a good hot foot bath. And if you're too weak or you're too sick or you just can't stand that much heat, you can still, on a smaller scale, apply the principle of having a hot foot bath in ionized water. And that too will pull the junk out of your system, and it will turn the water brown or black, or sometimes any other, you know, you'll get things like brown water with a green sheen, you know, and foam sometimes. It looks really, the first couple of times you do this, it'll look pretty scuzzy, but ionic foot baths are available for about $100. They used to be much more spendy than that. I bought mine when they were $500. But if you use hot water and do this, it has much the same rationale on a smaller scale than the super hot Japanese bath treatment, okay? If you have hot water on your feet, your blood is circulating through your feet and it's killing the parasites. It's just doing it on a smaller scale, right? So that is a good way of doing this too. There are some technologies that are much more, limited in home scale that are available to us now that you can use in your fight against cancer.
Oh, thank you, Anna. That was very good. I was looking at the foot pads while you were talking about them. That looks
Yeah,
really interesting.
yeah, the Japanese have used these for years.
Yeah.
Another thing that the Japanese have stumbled onto, or I remember reading the original research on this. A guy was wandering on the beach one day, a scientist, and he looked at this big rock and the tree that was growing out of the rock, and he was thinking, how is this tree managing to grow on a solid rock? You know? So he did some inquiries and some research, and he found out that the tree was able to do this because of a mineral called biotite.
Huh. Interesting.
And biotite has the amazing ability to draw out heavy metals and toxins out of your system also. So that's another way, is to get some zeolite or biotite and use that to cleanse out your system. Another thing that's coming out of all of this is a better understanding of how parasites inhabit your body and why they get out of control. And part of that is that we don't clean out our colon. We don't, at a certain point in our lives, as our metabolism slows down, we stop having the peristalsis, the strong peristalsis, and the other lubricating things. And also we wind up getting dehydrated because we forget to drink water, right? Okay, so that's another part of flushing everything out, right? So the the need to keep once a day bowel movements is important, and there are lots of natural and gentle ways of doing that. You don't have to take these over-the-counter constipation aids like X-Lax and Miralax and psyllium hulls and all that, because that doesn't really help. And neither does drinking huge amounts of water. What you want to do with water is sip the water about a quarter of a cup every 15 minutes, and that's how you get hydrated again. But you don't want to overdo too much water either, or then you wind up messing with your electrolyte balance, and that just,
Deplete
doesn't help.
electrolytes. Yeah.
Right. So what we found out is that you have two systems in your body. You have the arterial venous system that we all know our blood circulates around in, but we also have the lymph system, which is really where all of the waste collects and gets shunted out of the body eventually. The lymph is like the sewer water of your body, right? And so you want your lymph to circulate and you want it to be stimulated, all right? So one of the things you can do to stimulate your lymph is to get curcumin and get that added into your diet. It's a common spice in India and other places around the earth, in the Orient, and it's actually very good for you. It's another substance that helps to dull pain, so that's an extra little reason to take curcumin. But it also helps to get your lymph system working. And So it will help you reduce edema by 33% if you take a therapeutic dose, which is about a half a teaspoon a day. Okay, so however you get that, you can take curcumin and take it as a pill, or you can take it as a powder and drink it with a beverage, a tea or a milk or a juice, whatever it tastes good to you as. Another thing is lemon rind, lemon zest, any kind of citrus zest, which includes the shiny, bright rind, right? But it's the white stuff,
The white, yep.
the rind, that has the therapeutic effect. But if you just take a zester and make lemon zest and sprinkle the lemon zest over, a pot of pilaf or anything in which lemon tastes good, and just eat that, it will have a very good effect on fighting cancer and other kinds of problems that we have in the modern world. And that helps stimulate your lymph system and get it going, and prompts it to do its job. Another thing is bromelain, which is an enzyme formed in pineapple.
Pineapple, yeah, I've heard of that one. Yeah.
So if you eat fresh pineapple, that again is going to stimulate your lymph system up to 50% better than what it's now functioning as. And as the lymph system transports the gunk out of your body more effectively, then that also helps you retain and gain and get back where you need to be. The danger that we undergo when we're messing with the waterworks, so to speak, is getting an imbalance of our electrolytes, right? And so you don't want that. You don't, and this is all kind of instinctive, what you're doing and how you're doing it. So it's also recommended that you take some form of electrolyte supplement like Pedialyte, which they give to babies, or any of those kinds of over-the-counter electrolyte drinks. Will help you keep your potassium levels in the right balance range and keep you with your right magnesium levels too. Now, the one thing about that they never tell you is that you have to have enough D3 in your system to make the whole chemical reaction work. Okay, so the one vitamin that you may really need is D3, and at a bare minimum, 2,000 units a day is not. It's not that isn't overdosing by any means. You can take up to 50,000 units of D3 a day. Okay, and if you get really, really, really depleted, that's what the doctors tell you to do, is that they'll look at your skin, and one of the things they do is see whether your skin is loose enough to grab a good bit of the skin. If your skin is loose enough, you're doing okay. But if it's not, if your skin is tight and hard to grab a hunk of skin off of your arm, then that means that you're in range to take in some considerable amount of D3. Just saying. And this will help your metabolism. It will help your lymph system, and it will make your life easier, especially if you're a cancer patient.
Yeah. And I'm muted because I'm getting my dogs interrupting me now. I know you know what that problem is like.
Yes, indeed, I do. Okay, great. I think we've had a whole range of questions. It's been very, it's been a good session, and
Been very
thank
good.
you for being the host. And
I'll probably never get allowed to do it again because I didn't really look at the comments that well, but we'll see.
well, Niti's a forgiving sort. She'll probably give you a pat.
She will. She will. Thank you very much for your time today. And it was great visiting with you.
Take care.
Okay.
I'll see you guys next week, God willing.
Okay. Sounds good.